If anyone who's predicting what looks like in a year or two is going to be fundamentally wrong. We don't know where we're going, other than that we do know that we're going to keep building software while maintaining billions, if not trillions of lines of code that are already out there. A lot of these coding agents are actually really good at brainstorming. And so a lot of my developers are using Claude Code to write code, but before they do that, they also use Claude Code to brainstorm. And I don't see that going to be replaced anytime soon.
How do you envision the job of a future AI native developer?
The biggest skill as a software developer, as an engineer, is that I think you're going to see more of a agent-to-agent collaboration. What's really interesting about that right now is it gives me as a human feedback on code. Now, but if that code was written by Devin, why do you give that feedback to me, give it to Devin, and have Devin figure out? That's how you would do that in a human-to-human developer team, right?
What can you say about your new startup and what made you sort of take the leap from where you kind of were in GitHub?
I think that's the...
Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is for developers building with AI at the core. So whether that's exploring the latest tools, the workflows, or the best practices, this podcast's for you. A really quick ask, 90% of people who are listening to this haven't yet subscribed. So if this content has helped you build smarter, hit that subscribe button and maybe a like. All right, back to the episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the AI Native podcast. Today, we have a really exciting guest that I've known for quite a while here. We've managed to juggle schedules to make work, and that's Thomas Dohmke, who until recently was the CEO of GitHub, and is now, we'll talk about this and sort of the brave AI dev sort of startup land on it. Thomas, thanks for coming onto the show.
Hey, Guy, and thanks so much for having me.
So Thomas, it's sort of funny a little bit, as we connected here, or reconnected. We've been sort of chatting throughout the time. We talked a little bit about how we met initially, and this was actually it's not sort of hasn't been publicly discussed, but there was a moment in which it looked like GitHub might acquire Snyk early in the journey, and I guess that's how we got in a room, and clearly kind of led to interesting paths as GitHub got pretty big in sort of AppSec space on it. Clearly didn't happen on the Snyk side, which worked out pretty well. But those are like fun and intense conversations. There was a way to start a relationship there.
Yeah, so for the listener to have some context, it was summer 2018 to my memory. So Microsoft had already announced that we would be acquiring GitHub. I was part of that acquisition team together with Nat Friedman, who then became the CEO of GitHub, and a few other folks, Mario Rodriguez, who's now the head of product for GitHub. And as we had signed the deal, we were thinking, what else would be a strategic for the GitHub portfolio product and platform to be added to. And so we had a long list of interesting startups in the space, and one of them was Snyk. So to my memory, we had you over in the Twitter building, funny enough, where back then Nat's office was, and in the conference room we chatted a little bit of how your business is going and how the open source security space is important for GitHub as a platform, and obviously for Snyk as a product. And that's how we met the first time.
Yeah, I remember. I remember the conversation very vividly on it. We dragged Nat at some point. I think it was before that actually, to come speak at our all hands at a Snyk all hands, as he was sort of exploring possibilities. And it was interesting. You were in that sort of annoying window in which you couldn't act. You could just explore, because you were sort of waiting for the GitHub acquisition to close. And in the meantime, investors swooped in and gave us higher valuation opportunities in it. And anyways, it's sort of been fun times. Clearly, both kind of worked out pretty well. GitHub built a thriving security business. Snyk has kind of grown well.
Well, if we could time travel back to 2018 and tell both of us what the valuations of developer tools startups are in 2025, in 2018, everybody thought the 7.5 billion price tag for GitHub was high, and the valuation for Snyk was growing quite fast. And there were a number of other companies that felt quote unquote overpriced. In today's world, that's almost a seed round. And I think there's so much excitement, and we'll get to that later in the pod. But there's so much excitement in the space that people now believe that developer tools companies can become much bigger than back in 2018.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I guess kind of part of it is the sort of the software is eating the world, but also just a bunch of like more developers and just sort of better learnings about how to turn, I think, a bunch of these tools that were just described in like technical terms into kind of real business value, right? And so maybe it's just the software is in the world kind of trend, manifesting, and it's all inevitable. So I guess you're back in the sort of the startup reality of it, after GitHub, and a lot of the conversation when I sort of harken back to that moment was on kind of startups versus incumbents, right? You sort of have the large companies kind of coming along, have all the distributions, in the security context, for instance, GitHub eventually acquired and launched Dependabot on it. And clearly you can now kind of, flip a switch and suddenly all the repos get this functionality, which is this like massive power on it. And yet kind of common wisdom is that sort of startups are where innovation happens, right? And you learn the breakthroughs happen in sort of startup land on it, incumbents come along. And I was curious, like, you were sort of in the sort of the heart of it, from the sort of the incumbent land in GitHub, and now you're kind of going back to startup. I guess what's the view you've built up in terms of where innovation will come from in this world? Like is it still sort of the startups will innovate, or are incumbents kind of clued in enough that that you actually expect a bunch of the innovations and stuff to come from there?
We see innovation everywhere, right? Like it's both the startup world and the incumbents kind of like trying to out-innovate each other. I'd love, to think about competition in business is very similar to competition in sports.
Yeah.
And you have, a leader, right now in Formula One, it's now McLaren, but for like the last 4 years, it was Red Bull, right? And so that's effectively the incumbent, and they have the challenge of staying on top of the game, and they get the best people, poached off to other teams because they have a career path there and can become, the team boss. While at Red Bull, they were kind of like stuck, quote unquote, under the previous team boss. And the same is true in our industry. There's the big ones that make a lot of revenue. And I think it's easy to forget, when you're in the startup land or when you're looking at these two worlds, that the big companies, they fight a very different battle. If you want to grow a Microsoft at double-digit percentages every year, that's like double-digit billions of dollars that have to be added, that net new, right? Like on top of the renewals, as everything these days is a SaaS business or like a recurring revenue business. And so it's a very different game if you have to find 30-40 billion in net new revenue versus your small startup that is happy when they get to the first 1, 2 or 10 million in revenue run rate. So I think that's number one, is like you got to realize that they're not fighting in the same weight class in boxing. They're fighting in very different classes. But then when you look into what they're actually building, the products and the features, it's actually in the same space. And I think that's really what makes this so interesting. And so we see the big companies, all adding AI features and building agents and pushing really hard and staying, in the news. And then in the middle, kind of like are now the AI studios like OpenAI, Anthropic, and there's like big different sizes of these studios, right? From really big like OpenAI to quite small, and somewhere in the middle is Mistral and Black Forest Labs and what have you. And then there's the companies that are completely new, and they're building with these AI tools what you might call AI native, from the start. And I think that's a very, exciting space because effectively, as a dev, you start your morning not by going into Jira, or if you're more lucky, GitHub Issues, and if you're even more lucky, maybe it's linear. You go and open a terminal and you open Claude Code or AMP or Gemini CLI, and you kind of like brainstorm with the agent as the first step, right? And so that's a very different way of working than if you're in an existing code base in a large company where you have a lot of sneak findings that you have to work through. You have your product manager backlog, you have your technical debt, you have your on-call rotation. And so I think both of these sides will innovate in their own ways, and it will be really interesting of who can, change the world faster.
Yeah. I think it's I really like the sort of the lens on the sort of the dollar count, and I think it's one of those that gets a little bit challenged, I think, with AI, which is the level of attention, right? Because it was our CTO at Akamai before founding Sneak, and as we were sort of building business cases over there, it was immediately like, can this be a fairly instant within the next couple of years, at least like $100 million ARR business? Because otherwise, it's kind of hard to really rationalize it within the system. And so that definitely opens that window for companies to build up and prove out that a business will become, that size. But it seems like in AI, there's kind of this sort of sense that, things can become a $1 billion business in such a short window of time that bets are legit, to make even within the incumbents. I think that feels a little bit different now than it did in the traditional kind of a startup versus incumbent reality.
I think it is and it isn't. And the revenue numbers, or the enterprise sales motion is also often used as an excuse.
Yeah.
That you don't focus on the product anymore, and
Yeah.
you're accepting that the user experience sucks. I won't call out the product. I was trying to set up SSO for a tool that we want to use within my new startup, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. And it's like, you would think that's an easy thing these days to just connect your Google identity and have SSO for everybody. And I'm sure, somebody has a reason why this the way it is. And the challenge that we're all fighting is that we have not enough time in our days. And so everything, whether it's Netflix and YouTube, whether it's work, whether it's, real life things like Lego has become a battle about your wake time. And you can only reduce the sleep time so much until things that's really unhealthy, right? So battling for the wake time, and at work, that means setting priorities. And then I think, again, this is much easier at a startup, even more so if you don't have a customer yet. Right, like I was, my new company is fully remote, so everybody is somewhere around the world, and we recently met for the first time together in person in Singapore. And one of my opening remarks was like, "This is going to be the most happiest time in this company life, because we have no customers, we have no production system, nobody is on call. We're just prototyping." And are being creative, and so looking back, in a few years, this will look like the happy time, because in a year from now, hopefully, we have a product out there, and we have found some customers, and maybe they or even paying us some money, and then the life is very different, because then you have to prioritize between the thing you want to do and the thing that actually is driving the business. And that's what really big companies or companies that have found some form of product market fit are fighting every single day. And AI is shifting that, I think, to some degree, because agents allow you to take over things that you don't want to do. So you have more time for the things that you do want to do. I think, security findings, you mentioned Dependabot, those kind of things will get even easier, because an agent can just solve that for you to the degree where you only have to approve at the end that it's ready to deploy. Cleaning up, tech debt. I have the vibe coding book here from Gene Kim and Steve Yeager, and it has a lot of these anecdotes in there, like how they're going into, like, I think it's 25, 30-year-old code base, and all of a sudden they're burning through the issues that they never had any motivation to pick up. And that ultimately then means you have more time to build something cool.
Yeah, I think I relate to the sort of the speed kind of more maybe than the business model, specifically in AI. Like I think that is a change, and to be able to build a business in a native mode. I love I referred to the first sort of months, maybe, I guess, of Tesla's run as like the honeymoon period, because because reality hasn't hit you in the face yet. You get to build those, and but nobody has sort of told you your product sucks yet. Nobody told you this is technically infeasible on it. I guess there's an exception to that. I think both you and I were in a kind of privileged place in terms of ability to fundraise. So there's not all founders are kind of in that reality, but once you pass the fundraise, then those are good. Although there's something amazing about users telling you your product is amazing, and that's very satisfying. And so not having the user to tell you it sucks, it's like two sides of the same coin, right?
Well, you can't stay in that period for too long, because the longer you are in the honeymoon, the more grows your anxiety that what you're building is actually something that nobody wants. Right. And so you have to launch eventually to get that feedback cycle, or the flywheel, how Amazon calls it. And so both of these things are true, but you're right. If you're able to fundraise based on reputation or based on the idea you have, and so the money question gets out of the picture, then you have a certain period where things feel really good until you have to launch, and then you're faced with the reality.
Yeah, with the reality of So how I guess what can you say about your sort of new startup on it, and maybe again, what made you sort of take the leap from where you kind of were in GitHub to this world?
Yeah, I mean, what made me take the leap kind of explains where we're going. Look, I started in becoming a company founder in the developer tool space back in 2009. I left my job at Bosch in Germany, one of the big automotive suppliers. Building, if you have a car, with ultrasonic sensors in the bumper, those are most likely from Bosch or one or two competitors. And I left because I was so excited about the iPhone SDK and the App Store, and I wanted to become an app developer again after being in automotive for 6-7 years. And from being an app developer, I became the startup founder of a company called Hockey App that provided a developer platform for mobile app developers, distributing your beta apps, collecting crash reports and feedback. And that company got sold, or we sold to that company in late 2014 to Microsoft. So it's been now 11 years since I was last a startup founder. But ever since, my Hockey App days, I have been in developer tools. Hockey App was a developer tool. Then I was at Microsoft together with Nat building App Center, which was kind of like bringing the pieces of Xamarin Test Cloud and Xamarin Insights together with Hockey App. And we bought then we bought GitHub. I was VP of Special Projects at GitHub before I became the CEO. And through that journey, from mobile to the cloud to Copilot and AI, I've seen how software developers have changed the world. And that the really exciting thing, I think, is about being a software developer is that as you're building new products, you're constantly also evolving how you do that. And if I remember my first coding exercises in the early 90s, first on a East German Robotron computer and then on a Commodore 64, to what software development today is like, it's fundamentally different. Like if I would give my kids a Commodore 64, they would probably figure out how to play Gianna Sisters or something like that. But typing BASIC, and it's like, what the hell is this user interface? And where's my Copilot on my Stack Overflow or just Google to look things up?
The internet, exactly. The internet,
the internet was
pretty
missing.
Big
Open
deal.
source
like
missing.
Once you started doing it, you couldn't go back to sort of developing without it.
Correct, right? And so if we have always had these moments where the internet changed everything, open source changed everything, mobile changed everything, the cloud changed everything. AI is also changing everything. And I actually think, we are still at the beginning of that revolution. Now, Copilot started more than 4 years ago. ChatGPT came more than 3 years ago. Last year was all about chat and agent mode. And this year, clearly, it's all about full-scale coding agent, code review agent, security agents. But I still think, we are at the beginning of a journey where the way the software development lifecycle works is going to fundamentally change. And that's, what I'm excited about. And that's what we're going to explore in my new company.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, there's so much. I think there's always like an underestimating kind of natural reaction, when you think about just sort of the scale of the transformation. What's the sort of the cliches that people overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term, right? In terms of the potential of it. So your sort of
it's really hard to predict, right? Like if we go back a year into December 2024. Who would have predicted that at the end of 2025, developers are back in the terminal, with Cloud Code and Gemini CLI and Codex CLI and Copilot CLI, and have like 6 or 8 or whatever, a grid of terminals open, and have all these agents running in parallel and trying to figure out, how to make that work with Git work trees and how to merge all the results and how to not have the agent delete all the files on your computer or the work of the last 30 commits and what have you. And I think, that's where, if anyone who's predicting what that looks like in a year or two is going to be fundamentally wrong. And I think that's really what makes it so exciting. We don't know where we're going, other than that we do know that we're going to keep building software while maintaining, billions, if not trillions of lines of code that are already out there.
Yeah, and that are growing, and also like kind of a part of the challenge with the tools. Yeah. So there is, like, I'm still reading though, like there's a fundamental conviction for, like, when you make this move, that a lot of the ability to explore unencumbered is just sort of better to do in the dev space. And I guess from it's interesting to sort of see GitHub, like, because as when I think about innovation, from incumbents on it, Copilot is actually, like, GitHub Copilot is a great example of innovation that came from sort of within the company, and kind of like pioneered that sort of new space of coding assistant that feels like an AI tools now, sort of, like the old pattern, but for a while was there. And then, like, even with all of its reach and all of its sort of strength, there was like the opportunity for Cursor, I guess, kind of most notably to Copilot continued to thrive. So it wasn't really like at the expense of sort of Copilot, but from a market share perspective, kind of grow even faster, right? And sort of take up that sort of space on it. And then indeed you have the disruption coming from Anthropic, which is kind of hard to think about them. Are they a startup? Are they incumbents? Like those are very weird beasts. The sort of the OpenAI and Anthropic that are like, especially Anthropic, like sort of a short-lived organization and a massively valued organization, but still very much a startup in many ways. And overhauls like the fundamentals of it's going to be terminal versus IDE. So I guess there's a sort of a faith or still a perspective that when you're looking to disrupt, like I believe that especially when you're disrupting the way things are done, not just automating existing workflows, but rather sort of changing the way that someone work. Those are precisely the places where it's hard for an incumbent to kind of accept it because they have all the power in the existing way of working, and so it's hard to accept that change will come, right?
I think that's kind of like the outside in perspective, that you look at companies that have been leading for a long time and then are being disrupted or are seeing more competition, and you feel sad or worry about the people that are now kind of like in that position that they are no longer the best in the market. I think the inside out perspective is often not as dire as you may think. I've often thought when I worked for Mercedes, that the best thing that can happen to us is that BMW announces a new model with a new thing in it that the Mercedes leadership didn't want to fund, and all of a sudden you have an argument to get the funding, and be able to say, okay, look, our competitors are doing this, we better wake up and also try to catch up again. And you saw in the news that Sam Altman declared a code red, and Google had a code red, and I'm sure Satya had I know Satya had a bunch of code reds over his tenure, and so competition is good. It actually makes a business and it makes life more fun, and we see that everywhere. Coming back to my Formula One example, it was Red Bull that won for 4 years, and it was Mercedes for like 8 years, and then Red Bull had another 4 years. You kind of want these changes, and it motivates those that have been winning for too long, to come back and then see how do we now transform our organization to be a winner again. And if you mentioned Cursor and VS Code, actually the IDE space has been phenomenally stable over the last decade. And like I remember when I started on a Mac, I think was 2008 or 2007. I started on TextMate, and TextMate was the revolution back then. And then as TextMate kind of like became stale, and TextMate 2 took way too long, switched to Sublime Edit, and then VS Code came, and VS Code for the last decade was the default editor or IDE for almost everybody. There's obviously some Emacs users and some Vim users and what have you. And now we have real competition again. And it's not only Cursor and VS Code with Copilot. Windsurf is obviously in the play now. Recently, Google Anti-Gravity came out. There's a Kilo Code and Kiro and Z, and so there's a whole competition, and that means somebody sees an opportunity there to disrupt and to innovate and ultimately build a sustainable business. And I think that really is exciting and not something to worry about, both as the incumbent and as the disruptor.
No, I agree, and I'm not sort of worried about it. In fact, I like the changes. I think like all of these require a moment of disruption that sort of makes sense. That is hard for sort of the incumbent to follow. And you're right that it's always like competition is the greatest motivator for it and the opportunity to drive.
And at GitHub, it pushed us last year in 2024 to go from just having one default model in Copilot to offering multi-model choice. Where at GitHub Universe in October 2024, I announced that we now back then support Claude. What was even the version number? Claude Sonnet 3, I think. And Gemini 1.5 Pro, and in the meantime, if you open Copilot, it has like a whole list of major models, and then you can bring your own model and connect Open Router and all these kind of things, right? So you can kind of see the direct impact of competition in the market leading to a better product for the incumbent as well.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting, because I think one of the big questions that is on GitHub, we don't have to sort of over-rotate here on GitHub, but is that, GitHub has kind of managed to be Switzerland in many ways, for a long time. And it's like, hey, we're going to work with all these IDEs when all, there was VS Code, but it's not a moneymaker. It's sort of like a free service to to the ecosystem. And now with Copilot, it's like a little bit different. Like Microsoft, as a whole, makes a lot of money from actually being the sort of the provider of these different models, right? And sort of and not the builder necessarily, but the sort of the executor. A lot of the inference, running on Microsoft is a substantial revenue source and is invested. And so that sort of question on sort of neutrality, I guess, or like, do you want to sort of play nice with everyone as long as you use my agent, is an interesting. It's not entirely new, like it existed in sort of GitHub in other ways, and like in the apps, in the Sneak, for instance, like in the app security as an example. But it feels stronger now in terms of that internal conflict.
Well, Switzerland also still wants to make money, and all the companies there and the country itself, right?
None of this is like critical. It's just a change, right? It's just a change.
If you look at Microsoft, it is probably the biggest platform company that is out there. Like, it's not only Copilot and GitHub that have some form of neutrality, offering choice. It's also, if you look, for example, into Azure AI Foundry, which has like a huge range of models available. So it's not just the OpenAI and the Microsoft developed models. It's Mistral models and Black Forest Labs models and lots of open source alternatives, and you can deploy your own model, right? So in that sense, maybe the Switzerland analogy isn't as good as just saying it's a platform company, and platform companies by design want to have as many players on top of that platform, which is GPU inference as an example, or CPU compute or storage or what have you in Azure, because that helps both the platform provider as in Microsoft and the partners all to thrive. Right, I think that's really the leverage that Microsoft has as a business, is the scale of that platform, and that's the opportunity for every startup to become part of Microsoft Startup Program. And I should ask you, have you actually joined the Microsoft Startup Program? And are you thinking about co-sell?
We're sort of like in all the programs, right? We're because they all commit until you get.
But at some point, every startup gets kind of, especially every B2B startup, maybe less in B2C, but B2B, every B2B startup comes to the point where they either want to leverage Microsoft's distribution channel and an amazing enterprise sales team, or Amazon's or Google, because the scale of these sales teams around the world and their skill set is so far ahead of what a small startup can ever deliver without going through the pain of building out subsidiaries and building out local offices and local meetups, and there is a lot of human investment that has to happen that you can't replace with AI, because enterprise sales fundamentally is still a relationship management exercise.
Super valuable in the marketplaces and sort of all of that and sort of access to it. I think let me kind of veer us off. There's like a world that you and I can kind of geek out on the business side, but let's sort of make us a little bit more technical here on it. And we were just sort of established that it's hard to predict, but still, let's sort of make some predictions here. One of the things that I love your opinion on is kind of like the scope of products in the era of sort of AI dev tools of it, and maybe the first one is just like the delineation between sort of reviews and kind of collaborative interfaces, maybe like the GitHub interfaces. I guess we're sort of still there, but versus kind of earlier on premise, right? We see you can use agents locally. You can use agents that are sort of background agents, sort of the Devons of the world that will, now there's a whole variety of others that you'll only kind of meet the code at the PR to begin with. And then you see all the review agents. I had Meryl from Graphite kind of on the show here, and we talked about how they're adding, and that's true for everybody, an ability to now interact, with the whatever, like not just find a problem, but also kind of fix it right there on the spot. And there's the question, of course, well, if you could find a problem at that point, couldn't you have found it beforehand on it?
Yeah.
And a lot of the lines blur, a lot of the, where does, because automation is much more increased. And I'm curious, like, what's your lens when you think about the division of products, even between local devs and sort of reviews and collaborative? How do you picture these things evolving?
We always picture those things as somehow collapsing into just one, unified stack or suite of products or what have you. And I think the reality then is that never actually happens, and it's a bit of a pipe dream of every head of engineering or engineering manager, that they have just this beautiful stack that everybody in the company is using, and so you don't have to worry about outdated products or like conflicts between one product does this and one product does that. You're buying multiple times. So I think, let's be real, like there will always be overlaps in what companies do and products do, and there isn't like this one fits all solution. Sometimes it's purely based out of necessity of moving from one tool to another. Is painful, and you rather not invest that time and literally the time and the money of your engineers doing that just because you want something completely standardized. You're just accepting to some certain degree. I think to large degree, actually, in engineering, we will have to accept that entropy always exists in software, and your software and your stack always gets worse until you invest time to remove tech debt. One of my jokes, as GitHub CEO, has been always that debt is actually the wrong term, because debt is something you're supposed to pay off over time. In tech, we just refinance into the next big thing, and then there's always the next big thing, and before you know it, you have new debt, even though you just refactored from the old debt into the new debt, right? So it's more of a refinancing.
In the business world, the word for that is leverage, right? It's just a different lens over there.
It's part of it's similar to your house and your kitchen, that you never get out of the mode of putting the dishes into the dishwasher and out of the dishwasher unless you stop eating, and then you die. And that's actually true in software too. Unless you stop building new features into software, you're always going to be in a state where you clean up afterwards. And so, if coming back to your agent questions, I think you're going to see more of a agent to agent collaboration. So you mentioned Graphite, Meryl, and their code review agent. What's really interesting about that right now is it gives me as a human feedback on code. Now, but if that code was written by Devin, like, why do you give that feedback to me? Give it to Devin, right? And have Devin figure out, like, that's how you would do that in a human to human developer team, right? You would tell the two engineers to work together until they have reached stable state, and then they can come to me as kind of like the manager of these two humans or the two agents to say, hey, we're finished with our work. So I think there's going to be more, we're going to see more of that, like the agents working with each other to not make the human the bottleneck within the life cycle. Simon Willison on his blog recently had like a statement, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, we have to get comfortable with not reviewing every single line of code before we deploy them into production, because the sheer amount of code that a single agent can write 24/7, now you paralyze that into running 10 agents in parallel all the time. You're just never going to be able to review all that code without the one human doing that, becoming the major bottleneck and effectively erasing some of the productivity gains from these agents. And so you have to think about, how do you automate other processes down the line to be able to generate all that code in the beginning. I think one thing that's also like underappreciated is that a lot of these coding agents are actually really good at brainstorming. And so a lot of my developers are using Cloud Code to write code, but before they do that, they also use Cloud Code to brainstorm with the agent, to learn about a topic or about some special API or whatever have you,
or even implementation options, right? Like even sort of a different
what
paths
are the
you
other
can tackle.
options? To write an architecture document while everybody else in Australia is asleep, and when they can up, you already have something ready to share, and so then they can pick it up and keep working on this. So I think there's, and again, this is very human centric, right? Brainstorming. You have to tell the agent what you want to work on, and I don't see that going to be replaced anytime soon. Like, the idea still has to come from the product manager or engineer or founder, and the how is a iterative process with the agent, but it's not going to be replaced by an agent making up the idea, telling another agent to implement it, and a third agent to review and deploy it.
The agent-to-agent conversation is one I relate to, and I think it's still interesting when you think about the dev tooling ecosystem to think about who does this, right? Because you can run Cloud Code as all of these agents, right? You can run, any of these, whatever, codecs, right? Like, you can run that in the mode of, like, I wrote the code and run it with another persona. In fact, sub-agents kind of do that, right? Like, you are creating, you're delegating work, or you're passing along to something. agent that has the right context to represent expertise. You can choose different models on it. But if the agent is a human, oftentimes like from a company's perspective on it, it might be one company, that is, providing with the agent, and you're connecting it in all these different contexts. So I guess one thing I relate to, and I'm curious about, I don't know that we precisely know what the flow is, of what are the interface points for us to engage with larger bodies of volume of work. Because like review as a concept will probably increase in importance because you do less of the work, you review the work of AI. But a lot of the current like software development review activities maybe will go away, and it's not just for that, right? It's also like for testing. It's also for like I'm just picking on that as an example. And so I'm kind of curious and almost like a little bit concerned about a collapse of a lot of these different tools. And the reason I'm concerned about it is your comment before about competition, right? Is because you don't want it to just be a competition between five giants, right? You want a composable ecosystem, right? In which different pieces can kick in. I don't know if it's like a comment or a question that I'm sort of making here, right? But I guess, a little bit of like, what are the right delineations, for a company?
It's more, if you think about it, it's more composable than ever, though, right? Like nothing stopping you to use Claude Code today and Gemini CLI tomorrow and Codex on Sunday.
Yeah, very switchable.
And there's almost no switching costs, same for the IDE, same for the code review agent. And again, this goes back to the platform concept, right? The platform isn't changing. You're storing your code on GitHub or GitLab or Bitbucket, or one of the few alternatives that are out there. But on the agent side, on the AI side, everything is composable, and the space is moving so fast that there's, as we're recording this yesterday, GPT 5.2 came out. And until that point in time, everybody, was talking about Gemini 3 Pro being the best model. Now we're kind of like figuring out, is 5.2 now the best model? And by the time maybe this pod comes out, there's yet another model.
Maybe there's something
and everybody's
else,
like, what the hell is Thomas and Guy talking about what the best model is? And then so as such, there's like almost no switching cost. And that makes really this idea of I can compose my pipeline on the best tools I have available so much more, realizable than it was in the past when you did have vendor login, right? Like if you build your front end on React, there's really high switching costs to go to a different front end framework. When you're building your CI/CD on GitHub Actions, there's really high switching costs moving that away to another CI/CD provider. So in many other parts of the developer toolchain, we have high switching costs, but in AI agents, it's really, really low. And that really creates this competitive environment where what was the best thing 6 months ago may not be the best thing now. And whatever, the best thing is in 6 months, nobody can predict.
Yeah, I guess I guess I would challenge a little bit. Like you had this sort of comment over there that like the GitHub and GitLabs and Bitbuckets like are still the place you store, and like it's just the agent that you play around with. But I guess I would say that the platforms are optimized for a type of work. And so, the whatever sort of infrastructure estate management tools that existed pre-cloud were not the right tools to manage a cloud estate, because in the cloud estate, software or like hardware was elastic. You can kind of spin things out and down, and identity therefore of these machines was different because they were short-lived and immutable infrastructure and all that. And now we have a different breed of developers. The collaboration, as you pointed out, right, happens between agents. And so what type of tracking, and it's hard to not think about Git as that, because Git is like it's so ingrained, but I think we're both old enough to have kind of lived through Subversion and sort of, a bunch of this sort of, the places in which sort of Git felt like a heresy. But fundamentally you are versioning and storing and collaborating on, between different methodologies, right, on different competencies. And I find it actually really curious to think about what is the right way to version in, and should it be, and maybe this is a part of where my sort of pull request review, I was like, is pull request even like the thing to represent anymore? Because, is that really the point of collaboration? between agents, or is there something quite different, right?
I think the question, if we think about these collaboration platforms, though, is do I still have to go there to figure out what's the work that's assigned to me? What's my team working on? Or do I head into a world where I just ask my agent what's next, on my backlog, or what's Guy working on?
Yeah.
And so you're heading into this world where, your agent or your assistant, if you will, becomes like, Java's to Iron Man. And effectively knows everything and has sub agents, to access certain skills.
Yeah.
And so you would basically have your personal, agent that helps with travel booking and calendaring and has, access to your coding environment. And all of a sudden you don't actually open the browser as much anymore and open all these tabs and all these platforms where, your leadership team told you this is where your stack is.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to look for work. And so I think this is, but at the same time, there are still people writing COBOL for mainframes.
Yeah.
And, most of these COBOL projects have no DevOps whatsoever. They don't use Git. They don't have CI/CD.
Yeah.
They certainly have no Sneak or test cases and test suites and what have you. And if you take that as the most extreme example, you realize that as software developers, we live on that spectrum where there's the really old stuff that still powers, a huge part of the banking industry of, the local and federal governments and so on. And in between, you have people working on Windows APIs for displays on train platforms, Windows 95 APIs, not Windows 11 APIs.
But those are,
and so you have that spectrum, and so there is going to be the kind of like state-of-the-art developer that uses all these agents and doesn't have to go into the web anymore because all they can do is kind of like talk into the computer like Mr. Data and Star Trek and gets the job done. But in between are all the other people that still need everything else that we built in the last 30 years, and as such, that is really like a gradual change that's happening, and it's not this AI is writing 90% of all code now, and we don't need all this old stuff anymore. I think as long as we are aware of when we're talking about how exciting these agents are, that in the middle is like a huge spectrum of other work that still exists that engineers have to work on. I think it's both exciting and also grounding how much work there is going to be for the next century to come.
Yeah, for sure. And that sounds very aligned with the sort of, it's more of a decade of the agent versus the year of the agent, from Karpathy's kind of quote on it. And it's true. And, I kind of sometimes say how like application security companies are like cockroaches, they never die because technology never dies. And you kind of need to sort of secure all the way these, back to the Middle Ages, right? You need to provide support for that. And clearly none of the new companies wants to sort of go there, right? And the inevitable kind of growth of any enterprise software company, but specifically, for that, you have to go historically, right?
I think you unintentionally made a bit of a cynical statement about your own company.
It's true.
So you could leave because it never dies.
First of all, like I'm very happy for Sneak to be sort of, immortal, and I'm happy with that. But it's also like you just sort of see. I've been in AppSec actually for over a decade before I started Sneak, and sort of have seen all these companies that, just they came and they toned down, but they never went away because of those. So it's interesting, and I agree with you. And I think technology is very different. I guess kind of one topic to that I feel like this leads into is like as individual, as sort of the humans in this whole kind of movie. When the cloud came along, I guess you could kind of appreciate that, yes, there's historical ones, and maybe you made kind of a version of a choice of like, I'm going to really specialize in this sort of mainframe stuff because it's going to be a big moneymaker. I'm going to suffer, but I'm going to make a lot of money, and I'll sort of specialize over there. I'm slightly cynical here, or maybe a lot cynical. Or I can go and immerse in this sort of new world of cloud, and there was like maybe a little bit more clarity, at least at some point, around the skill set that you need to therefore build to be a cloud native developer, right? To sort of be, a capable professional in this new era. And AI is a bit more murky than that. So like a bunch of these predictions are, beyond their intellectual curiosity. I think, of course, for you and I, they're bets around as we build dev tools in companies. You have to have a theory of the future and then be very adaptable, but you have to have a theory of the future. But then, for so many more people, there's a question of like, I'm a developer. What would my job look like? What would be my competency in the future? So I guess what's your view on that, right? If someone comes along and says, so what should I get great at? What should I how do you envision the job of a future AI native developer?
Ever since I went to university, I felt like you're actually never done with learning as a software developer. There is no stable state, and those that feel like they have reached stable state are ultimately planning for their retirement, either voluntary or involuntary. And sure, there is stuff that hasn't changed much, like IBM mainframes and COBOL code, but I think if you look into your company and if you look into the world out there, you realize that that's not a growth opportunity, and the team is getting smaller and smaller, and you start working
Totally fair.
on more
Yeah.
boring tasks. And so you have stable state. You can be like a specialist, and maybe you can even ask your boss for higher salary, because the boss will have a hard time finding college grads or university hires that actually want to work on COBOL. But that stable state ultimately is over the long run not stable. It's just a gradual decline until this reaches zero, or like a marginal value. And as such, the biggest skill as a software developer, as an engineer, is that you know how to learn new stuff, and how to put this new information in relation to what you're currently working on, because not everything is actually as exciting as it looks, and there's also the danger to jumping on the new train, and then you realize,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is actually throwing us back 2 years. Like when Apple released the Swift programming language for the very first time, a lot of developers were excited, and then they realized moving their project from Objective-C to Swift, it wasn't actually ready,
Not
and
a
it was
pleasant,
slower, and
yeah.
the downloads all of a sudden was blown up by like 100 megabytes or whatnot. And there's many such examples where just jumping on the new technology isn't the right decision either. And so having that skill, to learn, and then to judge, to apply your craft, your craftsmanship that you have learned over the last decade or so, and ultimately, taste, to say, okay, we are going this way and not that way. And I think this is crucial even more so now with agents. It's really what you could call engineering skills, like taking a huge problem. And often, the huge problem isn't as huge as building Facebook, but it's huge enough that you don't know how long it will take you to actually implement this, and breaking it down into smaller pieces, right? All the way down to, okay, so now I know what method and unit tests I have to write to actually implement the next abstraction layer. And I think that engineering skill of decomposing a big problem into a small problem, then deciding how to split the work in your own day and with your other team members, that is even more crucial with AI, because only if you know what you can offload to an agent and the agent can actually implement efficiently, and what you have to do yourself, then you gain productivity from AI, right? Like if you just try and error everything here, agent try this, okay, bad, try this again, bad. At some point, you could just go into the CSS file and change the background color yourself, right? And there's like some one-line changes where it's like idiotic to use AI if you know exactly where to do that, and you might use AI to just see how the agent fails with that, and you have a good post on X, but the reality is, the engineering skill set will be to know when I can offload my work to an agent, or work with a coworker, and when I have to do it myself.
But how? So I mean, I absolutely agree with that today. But then what I would challenge is, if you're a kid coming out of sort of university right now, right, and you don't know that, is the right sort of domain to sort of really double down on investing in getting good at that, and sort of knowing how to get down and know which lines in the CSS to edit, versus sort of spending the opportunity cost, right, of that time learning how to maybe like convey and sharpen, like what it is that you want to build, right? Or maybe even building like product and sort of and kind of a user sensibility appreciation. So, kind of leveling up either towards the kind of a faster sort of progression, I guess, for most people towards the architect skills, or into the more sort of product definitions, or maybe some sort of new nascent profession. But I don't know, like feels hard for me to sort of justify the time invested, even if today you do benefit from having that type of depth of skills.
Or is it that the kids, whether they go to high school or to college, actually learn how to use AI much faster than the senior or staff developer that has already been doing that for a decade or two? If I look into my kids in school, they have to submit essays, and funny enough, you can actually read the essays of all the other kids as well, and you clearly can see who used AI to write it, which I actually think is cool. Like, kudos to those kids that are like, maybe it was short before the deadline. And then the teacher probably can also see that this was written with AI, the long M dash and whatnot.
But they don't have the engineering skills. Like, they will embrace the AI faster.
No,
they don't have the engineering skills. So like, should they lean into the engineering, or should they
next time they're going to review the output and prompt the AI to build a version where the teacher cannot detect that it came from AI, right? And so as you, I think, in many ways, we should actually start in very early, like first grade or whatever, to teach our kids how to use AI to not cheat in a test, but to actually iterate, and modify the results and verify that when it talks about whatever what it actually says is the right answer. And so I think teaching kids that skill of how to leverage AI to the best possible outcome, that is what we're going to see a new generation, of AI native humans, if you will. That in the same way that if you look at what is it, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, they have grown up. They have grown up with smartphones, and so for them using WhatsApp and Signal and chatting with their friends is totally natural. And while you and I, when we grew up, we had to make a landline phone call, and then you had the parents on the phone, and you kind of like had to pass that first barrier of explaining to them why it's now a good time for you to talk with your buddy, or even worse, with your future girlfriend or whatever, right? And so like you see how the next generation is adopting this new technology, and I think they have ultimately a better life. There's challenges as well, but like it's liberating and democratizing. And I think the same will happen with AI, and everybody will be able to learn coding, even if their parents have no technical background, even if school is bad at teaching it, because they can just leverage the Copilot or the ChatGPT that's always there for them. And you know what? And also doesn't judge them, and doesn't say you're stupid, or doesn't say you should have learned that 3 years ago, right? That's the other thing that's really liberating, is that you can ask your AI assistant any quote unquote dumb question, and it will keep answering until you run out of patience. It will never run out of patience.
Yeah, I want to sort of stress a bit about the sort of the engineering skills. Like in all of that narrative, which I fully buy into, they didn't necessarily need to know the underlying, when you get an image from AI, you don't need to know how to draw to be able to sort of guide it correctly. You need to know what you want better. And so with engineering, I feel like we get drawn into this, but you need to know how to engineer. Today, that's true because they're limited. But in a decade, is that still true? And I guess I get drawn a little bit more to, like, I guess my biases are more about like, know what you want, which is actually pretty darn hard, right? Like, it's not an easy thing to answer, and then know how to convey it and know how to verify that it's been done correctly. And to an extent, let go of some of your sort of coding chops to sort of critique the AI's work, or like to not invest in improving those. Yeah.
I think we're already in that state where, you mentioned the image example, where you can easily also detect what is AI slop, and at some point you're just not going to go to that Substack anymore, or listen to a presentation of all the AI, all the images is poorly generated stuff, and so that basically forces the creator to get better at doing that, and in a way that's the new craft, right, of learning how to use AI to get a better output. And for images, 10 years ago, then the craft was to use Photoshop or use pencil and pen. But of course, you could have made your same argument, 20 years ago when Photoshop first came out, that it replaces the artist that draws with pen and paper with something that's very easier, quote unquote, except now there's experts in Photoshop that are so much better than you and I in Photoshop, and so there's still a craft that exists, and we're going to see the same with AI. There's those that are creating amazing images with the help of AI that we cannot create without learning how to do that. And if you take that back to software, look, the reality is, commercial software projects and their businesses ultimately have to generate a profit in the long run. And ideally, you have healthy margins.
Yeah.
Or growing margins at least to sustain that business.
Yeah.
That's not going to work if you don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. And that's not going to work if you don't have engineering and business skills, to work with these agents to create, ultimately a product that returns, enough money to pay the salaries and a profit for the company. And so then the question really becomes is, who are the companies that are fast enough to learn these engineering and business skills? And who are the ones who think they can get away with, just vibe coding everything and not paying attention to this? Because those companies ultimately will run out of money, lacking competitiveness, that they will not survive in the market.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, you have to know the insides to sort of innovate in it.
Yeah.
And so there's we can go on this for an hour, but I think we're sort of running out of time on it. Super excited to sort of see what you build on it. Thanks for all the insights here. If someone wants to sort of follow your journey, when you share more about your sort of next evolutions of your company, how can they follow you?
They can follow me on X. I'm Ash Tom there, and I'm also Ash Tom, or just my full name, on LinkedIn. In the last few weeks, I've been a bit quiet as we're working in stealth on the new startup, but certainly more to come throughout 2026.
Cool. Well, really excited to see what comes out. Thanks again for sharing this, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. I hope you join us for the next one.
Thank you so much, Guy.